Right, Daniel chapter 2. And this is a class episode in the life of Daniel. Stories kicking in. But we need in mind, we're not just here for a cracking story. We're reading stuff that happened in the life of Daniel because we want to see how that shows us what happened in the life of Jesus, so that that then impacts us in our lives in Gracemount. Because a lot has changed, granted, in the 2,600 years since Daniel, the 2,000 years since Jesus. But God has not changed. And the God who reveals himself to Daniel and reveals himself in Jesus is the God who is revealing himself to us as we open his word this morning. So my excitement, as we come to this today, isn't just to retell an exciting story about folk who are dead, but because it reveals the enduring kingdom of a God who's forever alive. So Daniel chapter 2, there's 5 scenes in it. We're going to hit 4 of them today. I'm going to tag the last one on Daniel chapter 3. And I want to kind of give us a summary statement for each of the 4 scenes that strung together is going to make us a sentence that helps us get what God wants us to get. So Daniel chapter 2, verse 1, here's the setup. In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, so he couldn't sleep. Now this lad's one of the most rich, powerful guys in the world. His kingdom's massive, his bank account is minted, his palace was amazing. You can probably imagine him for most of this episode sitting in his unbelievable palace on a massively ornate throne. Apparently, by the way, he had a lion either side of his throne, like a living, real lion. Just because you would, right? If you're the richest guy in the world, it's the kind of thing you'd do. This guy can get anything he wanted, but he can't get sleep. Night after night, same nightmare. He's massively powerful, but this starts to make him massively paranoid. Now that probably relates actually in some ways, because in Gracemount you've got, we're not a kingdom, but we've got kings. We've got lads who rule this place. And from what I know, it's not uncommon for the big players to have big issues with peace and with sleep. You just need to walk around and spot the houses in and around the scheme that have healthy security cameras on them, because the houses that are the most secure reveal the people who are the most insecure. Power rarely comes with peace. And so the king gathers his dream team to try and get some understanding on his nightmare. But he gives them an impossible task. Verse 5 he goes, "You need to tell me what my dream means without me even telling you what my dream was." And in verses 5 and 6, he gives incentives of both a proper big carrot and an even bigger stick. He says, if you can do it, I'll give you a cut of my wealth. But if you can't do it, I'll cut you to pieces. Now, in asking the impossible, he almost sounds irrational, but actually he's smart. He's weeding out the charlatans in these wise men. He goes, any old con artist can have a bash at in interpreting a dream that I tell you. But I don't want you to know what you think it means. I want to know what it actually means. And if you can tell me what my dream was without me even telling you what my dream was, I know it's worth me listening to you to know what my dream means. You see what he's saying? It's a little bit like, I've seen 2 different physios, a chiropractor, and about 3 different doctors about my sore back. And they've all told me different things about what they think is wrong with it. And the longer it's sore and the more of their thoughts they give me, the more it winds me up. I don't want to know just what you think is wrong with my back. I want to know what is wrong with my back. And that's where the king's at. If you can tell me what my dream is without me telling you what my dream was, I know that it's worth me listening to what you say my dream means. And so obviously they look at each other and they've got knout. So they try and stall him through a little bit of flattery and that, but in the end, chapter 2, verse 10, they go, there's no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great or mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they don't live among humans. So here's where this thing starts. There's no one on earth who can do this. And the king goes, well, if you've got nothing for me, then I've got no need of you. And verse 12, his fury commands their execution. And notice in verse 13, that includes Daniel and his friends. This is where Daniel chapter 2 kicks off. When no one on earth can do this. Now, if that's where your life feels like it's got stuck, Maybe you can relate to where this episode starts. No one on earth can help me. But you need to know that although this is where this episode starts, it's not where it ends. And in the Bible, it's often when earth's got nothing for us that God steps down from heaven to us. That's the kind of arena that Jesus did his thing, when no one else was strong enough, where nothing else has worked, where everyone says, why bother? It's often when earth's got nothing for us that God steps down from heaven to us. So, scene 2, verses 14 to 24. We'll add a bit to our sentence. When 1, no one on earth can do this. 2, there's mercy from the God of heaven. Now spot it, because at this point in the episode, everyone in the scene is at an end of themselves. The king is furious and sleepless in his bed, and all the wise men have an execution order over their head. That's where you are. Everyone is helpless. But there's a hint in verse 13 as to where help and hope are going to come from. Verse 13 says, so the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and the men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. And there's a cheeky wee act of rebellion in that verse. Mind, Daniel and his pals had their names changed. They were changed to Babylonian names, and Daniel wasn't Daniel anymore. He was called Belteshazzar. But which name does verse 13 use? His old name. The name that advertised and shouted about God, the Lord the Judge, his name meant. And so in this bleakness of helplessness, the use of Daniel's old name shines like a neon sign in a night sky that says, when earth's got nothing for us, God steps down from heaven to us. And for the rest of this chapter, it sticks with Daniel's old names, him and his pals. It's making the point that the God of heaven is still making himself known in a kingdom that's tried to banish him. Daniel knew from his own nation and his own name that earthly help is not all there is. And so verse 17, Daniel goes to his house, he gathers his mates. In verse 18, he urges them to plead with God for mercy. Now, without doubt, some of the urgency in their prayers comes from the fact that they've got a date with an executioner. But their prayers are also fueled by a faith in the God of heaven. The Babylonian gods, who aren't gods at all, he says they don't dwell on earth. They can't help us here. But Daniel's understanding is that you can pray to the God of heaven for mercy, and he steps down to give it. And so they pray. They plead for God to give them help in their helplessness, for God to do what for them was impossible, for God to spare their lives. They pray. By the way, if you're a Christian, if the last year of our lives on earth haven't taught us to pray more to the God of heaven, then we're more lost than we ever realised. Or if you're not a Christian, and you're in deep darkness feeling like earth's all out of stock of everything you need, and you need to know that God of heaven's got endless supplies. That's what it happens here. In the helplessness of Babylon, they pray to the God of heaven. And for the helplessness of Babylon comes mercy from heaven. Look at verse 19. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. What he needed, God gave. And so Daniel goes two places. He says, thank you to God, and then he goes, take me to the king. Now both of those things are remarkable in some way. Daniel says thank you to God in verses 20 to 23. Maybe it's just a prayer. More likely it's probably a song. What's going on around the kingdom? The king is still sleepless. The rest of the wise men are probably still sobbing. But what is Daniel doing? He's singing like Nikita on WhatsApp. Why? Because although God's got a monopoly on wisdom and power, verse 20, they're his. He gives them to his people when they pray, verses 21 to 23. Now anyone else who's got a monopoly on something, and again you'll see this in the scheme, even just with drugs. You've got a monopoly on something, you can then use that to multiply your profit. It's not how God works. He uses his monopoly on wisdom not to gain himself, but he uses his monopoly on wisdom to multiply his mercy to people who have got nothing to offer him. Nebuchadnezzar tried to silence any name or noise of Daniel's God in Babylon. But now Daniel is singing of the mercy of his God right in the heart of Babylon. So he goes, God, thank you. God, I praise you. And having gone there, he then goes, right, take me to the king. And what are all the other wise men doing? They're trying to avoid the king. Probably running from him. But for Daniel, the mercy of God that spares his own life gives him courage to face the king who wanted him dead. So take me to the king. Which takes us to scene 3, verses 25 to 30. I'm going to add another bit to our sentence. So, when no one on earth can help, there's mercy from the God of heaven who reveals what will happen in the future. 1, 2, 3. No one on earth can do this. There's mercy from the God of heaven who reveals what's going to happen in the future. In verse 27, Daniel stands before the king, and in some ways, he confesses the same thing that the wise men said. Nobody on earth can reveal the mystery of the king. But in verse 28, what happens? He says, but. No one on earth can do it, but there's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And watch what he says 3 times about what this dream is about. We still don't know what the dream is, but look what he says the dream is about. Verse 28. He has shown the king what will happen in the days to come. It comes again in verse 29. And the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. And it comes again in verse 45. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. Nebuchadnezzar just wants to know what his dream was, but Daniel tells him the God of heaven knows all about him and he knows all about his future. The king was fully known by God and the king's future was fully known by God. Now in some ways, they're both things that we really want. First, we want to be known. We don't want just to have superficial pals who use us and then lose us. We want the intimacy of being known. And we want to know the future. And that can just be watching the weather forecast, placing bets on football, or going to get our tarot cards read. But actually, when we get this and we go, I'm fully known and my future's fully known, we start to feel pretty exposed. Actually, that's how a lot of people felt around Jesus. When people were around Jesus, they said things like, he knows what's fully in a man. One woman said, come and see a man who told me everything I've ever done. He even predicted people's denials, betrayals, and deaths. There's an uneasiness to this. The God of heaven knows all about us and he knows our future. And from verse 30 we know that humble Daniel. The question is, what's he going to do to the king when Daniel reveals it to him? God knows all about his future. Well, that's where we get to scene 4. Verses 31 to 45. And this is where we finally hear the nightmare that makes the king sleepless at night and then made him into a kind of wannabe slaughterer in the day. So, let's add another sentence. When no one on earth can do this, there's mercy from the God of heaven who reveals what's going to happen in the future. And here's the key of the dream. Number 4. The earthly kingdoms will end, but God's kingdom endures. Now, Daniel tells the king his dream. He knew it already, obviously, but Daniel shows that God has revealed it to him. And the dream's about a statue and a stone. A statue that starts stunning, but ends up smashed. And a stone that starts small and ends up filling the earth. Let's take them one by one. The statue. Now, the statue is God showing the king what is going to happen in the future. The statue is made up of 4 parts. It's a statue of a person. Part 1, Nebuchadnezzar is told, you are the gold head of the statue. Part 2, verse 39, there's devastating news for you though. Because it simply starts with those words, after you. After you means that there's an end for you. Your kingdom is going to end. Which is why part 2 of the statue underneath the head is made not of gold but of silver. Through the dream, God is showing the king a future when an inferior nation, silver to gold, will topple his superior nation. Babylon will be gone. Then there's part 3 made of bronze. Then they'll be replaced by this other nation. Part 4 is then made of iron and clay, and they'll be replaced by this nation that is divided. Now, what does God tell Nebuchadnezzar with this one massive statue made up of 4 different parts and 5 different types of stuff? Well, God is telling Nebuchadnezzar what is going to happen in the future, in the 600 years before Jesus is born. And this is exactly what happens in the next 600 years. Babylon, the golden head, is replaced by who? The Medo-Persians. The Medo-Persians are then replaced by the Greeks. The Greeks are then replaced by the Romans, who have a divided kingdom. And so each of the 4 parts, and then even in the division of the final part, what God said would happen in the future is exactly what happened in actual human history. And then in the time of the kings of the Romans, in the time of this divided empire, God starts to set up what he promised he'd set up in verses 34 and 44. Here's the story of the stone, where again he's showing the king what is going to happen in the future. This stone has got a miraculous beginning. Verses 34 and 45 say, it is cut without hands. It's a miraculous thing. Miraculous like a virgin birth. The God of heaven coming to earth. It's got a miraculous beginning, but it's got an unimpressive appearance. The statue looked stunning. Gold, silver, bronze. But the stone is just a stone. Standard, it's small. Like a carpenter from a nowhere place, like a teacher with 12 working class followers, like a convict hanging from a Roman cross. A miraculous beginning, an unimpressive appearance. But watch, because it's got a kind of weaponized edge. I don't know if when you were a kid, for me, stones were weapons. Whether you're chucking them at Coke cans or chucking them at windows or trains or just at other pals. The stone's a weapon. And in the king's dream, the stone hits the statue. And the statue breaks into pieces, turns to dust, and then is swept away, not even leaving a trace. What is God showing the king? He's showing the king that just as his kingdom will be replaced and divided, God is showing that one day Jesus will be thrown like a stone from heaven to destroy everything that has destroyed his people. Now you can look at Jesus being crucified at the hands of the Romans and it looked like this big statue is crushing a small stone. But in Jesus' death and resurrection, he was actually dealing a fatal blow to the oppressive kingdoms of this world and breathing life into God's new kingdom. It was the start of the empires of the world being overthrown. Babylon has gone. Rome will go. The rod of the oppressor will be broken. Satan's head will be crushed. Sin will be stripped away. And death will be destroyed. Earthly kingdoms will end. But this little kingdom, one man hanging on a cross, one man pushing a stone away from a tomb, will endure. Miraculous beginning, unimpressive appearance, weaponized edge, with a worldwide end. The stone, we're told, grows. Grows from a little stone into a massive mountain, up into a point where, verse 35, it fills the whole earth. That's what the king saw in his dream. The statue swept away and gone. The stone to a mountain, to a kingdom that fills the world. Now step back for a second, and it's just this madness as Daniel tells the king the dream and interprets it for him. The madness for the king is that he hadn't opened his mouth to tell Daniel what he'd seen in his bed, but Daniel has told him exactly what was in his head. And Daniel didn't just spell out the dream, he spells out the future. No one on earth could have done that. Only the God of heaven can do that. But there's a madness in that for us too, because we can read this and not just see the prediction for the future, but actually we can look back and see its fulfillment in history. These kingdoms actually rose and fell, just as the king dreamed, as Daniel explained, and as God promised. And the kingdom of Jesus today has grown from a tiny little thing in one place in the world to the point where it is set up all over the globe. See, when no one else can do this, there was mercy from the God of heaven to reveal what's going to happen in the future, that earthly kingdoms will end. But God's kingdom endures. Now, if this was told 600 years in advance, and it's then being kind of worked out in the rest of human history, that should grab us. It should arrest us as we sit on our sofas this morning, right? The God of heaven involved in earth, revealing the future, and then playing that out in human history. So let me just spell that out quickly, once if you're not a Christian, and then for you if you are. If you're not a Christian, one of the big things we need to see in this is the simple statement, you won't live forever. Now I could chat to you today some like nice flowery, flattering, fluffy things, like the wise man said to the king in verse 4, "O king, live forever." And sometimes in these hard days, these are the empty things we say to one another. Oh, everything's going to turn out okay. Once we're out of lockdown, we'll be back to normal. You'll be just fine. May you live forever. But saying stuff like that, it's like handing out paracetamols in a cancer ward. It doesn't get to it. There's something going on in us, in you, that's deeper than that. And maybe you're long enough in the tooth to realise that there's a part of you that no one on earth can help. The point of this episode in Daniel is to break through the ceiling and say that when earth's got nothing for us, there is a God who's come down from heaven to us. A God in heaven who in his son Jesus has come down to live on earth to reveal to you what's really going on in your life and to give you his mercy that would save you from death. And today he reveals your future. You can either live as part of this statue that starts stunning but ends up smashed, or you can live as part of this stone that ends up struck, that ends up taking over the entire world. You live for yourself, you live for this world, and you end up struck and swept away into hell by Jesus. Or you cry out today for God for mercy. You put your faith in Jesus, take your stand on his mountain, and become part of the kingdom that's growing and will one day fill the earth. Because what will count on the day we stand before God as our judge is not our standing in the kingdom of the world, but whether or not we're standing on the rock that is Jesus. And maybe today is the day for you to cry out to him. No one on earth can do this. I need mercy from you, the God of heaven, to rescue me from that future I deserve and to make me part of the kingdom that endures forever. Today's the day to pray. For God to help you in your helplessness. For God to do what for you is impossible. And for God to spare your life. You will not live forever unless you put your faith in Jesus. But if you are a Christian, here's the big takeaway for you in Daniel 2. If you're not a Christian, it's you won't live forever. If you're a Christian, the takeaway is you won't live in Babylon forever. Now mind this book's written to God's people who are in exile in Babylon. They're in the part of the story where the kingdoms of the world are looking stunning and strong, like a massive statue. And God's kingdom looks small and unimpressive like a wee stone. And it's tempting when you're in that moment to forget the bigger story and just get stuck in this one scene that you're in. Right? The kingdoms of the world become tempting and terrifying. God's kingdom seems so humble and hard, and it feels like we're never going to get out of Babylon. But in a world that's trying to conform you to its image and its way of viewing the world, you need to remember who you are. Like Daniel's name, you are not Belteshazzar as Babylon wants you to be. You are Daniel, or for us, you are a Christ one. You've experienced God's mercy. You've heard the good news that in Jesus God's kingdom's come. You can look back over those thousands of years and see Jesus as the fulfillment of all of the promises God made for the future. You can see his kingdom's miraculous beginning, its unimpressive appearance, but then its worldwide growth. And as you see his faithful mercy so far, you can be assured that you won't live in Babylon in exile forever. Don't get stuck in the scene you're in. See the end of the story. Don't stand in awe of the statue that will soon be smashed, but stand in awe of the mountain that was once a stone that will soon cover the whole world. Because one day all that would destroy us, he'll destroy forever. And he'll bring us into his forever kingdom and our forever home, when his perfect peace will cover the whole earth as the waters cover the sea. And in the meantime, having experienced that unbelievable mercy and the assurance of that certain future, We need to be like Daniel, having that instinct to pray, singing out our souls in praise, having the courage to stand before kings, getting involved in the spreading of that gospel at the end of the earth, and serving him wherever he has placed you.